This week in the field, I try my hand at time-lapse photography. Hey everyone, I'm Scott Davenport and welcome to In the Field. Thanks for joining me today. If this is the first time you're checking out one of my videos, thanks for giving me a shot. I hope you like what you see, and maybe you'll subscribe to the channel. Well, today I'm talking about time-lapse photography. That's not something I've done a whole lot of. I've dabbled here and there, but today, the footage I'll share with you, this was the first time I really went out specifically with taking a time-lapse in mind. And the reason is this little device here, which is called a Timelapse View. I'll talk a little bit more about this after I show you some of the footage. Let's have a look at what transpired in the field. The sun's starting to rise behind downtown San Diego, and it's shaping up to be quite a nice one. Nice bit of color in the sky. And I am doing a time-lapse and trying out this new device here, which is still hard to see in the dark. You can see there's something up on top of the camera. And once it gets a little brighter, I'll talk more about this. But for now, I'm just going to enjoy this sunrise. So the device is still firing away there, and what it's done is it's already adjusted both the exposure time and the ISO. I started with my ISO a little higher before dawn, and those things are being controlled by the camera. The aperture ramping, that's not something I'm able to do with this device and the Sony camera, so you got to pick something reasonable so as the light comes up, I'm going to have some decent focus. So I chose a 5.6 and focused on the skyline, and this again started really early when it was too dark to do any filming and show you what was going on. By far, the most difficult part of time lapses is the waiting. Sunrise is shaping up pretty nicely. I'm happy that the clouds are starting to come in and drift over downtown. I was a little dismayed with my framing. At pre-dawn, you got to make a choice, and I had chosen to frame up with a little less of the right-hand edge of downtown. That's where all the color is. I'm catching a little bit of it at the edges of the frame. But now that the clouds are rolling in over downtown, that should make the time-lapse a lot more interesting. So the outing was good, although it was a little boring at times. I do think that I want to do time lapses with other photographers. I spent about 2 hours at this location and came away with enough frames to make about a 20-second time lapse at 24 frames a second. So, it's a long amount of time spent to come back with, a short amount of video at the end of this. Now, what about the Timelapse View? I need to do a deeper video on this. I'm still getting comfortable with the device. It worked as advertised, ultimately. And what it's doing is, in addition to being an intervalometer, it's also ramping the exposures. So the idea being, you start out like I did, really early in the morning. It's dark. You would need to either crank up your ISO or expose for a longer amount of time to collect enough light to make a good image. And then as the morning progressed, as the sun comes up, the scene is brighter, and you would lower the ISO, shorten the exposure time, all that kind of stuff. And so what this device is doing is communicating to the camera and telling it, make these changes, and it's got some smarts built into it so that you can set a few parameters and let it do that ramping for you. And they actually has a nice back end built into Lightroom to help you with the processing and smoothing out of all the different changes across all of your photos, and to help make a nice end time lapse. Now, my time-lapse ultimately was a failure, not because of the time-lapse view, but because my focus was just off. Something wasn't quite right. Either I didn't nail the focus to begin with, even though the focus peaking showed me otherwise, or I inadvertently hit the focus ring or bumped the camera. Something was off, and so I could see that immediately once I got the photos loaded into the computer. I saw it at a full screen size. Yeah, the skyline's soft. Something's wrong. The tip of the week is focus. Make sure you've got your focus set, especially if you're going to invest the time like I did for a time lapse, and then to come away and it to only be, oh, geez, it's just off and it's wrong.
Thankfully, this is a spot where I can go again and again. It's not far from where I live, but it would have been much more heart-wrenching if I had traveled to a national park or overseas or something and captured what I thought would be a great time lapse, only to find out that the focus just wasn't quite right. So double check everything. If you're using focus peaking, great. Still double check it. Do that whole magnification if your camera supports it. Make sure you've got your focus nailed. And I think that applies to anything, not just the time lapses, for stills as well. And that'll do it for this week's In the Field. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you're thinking about getting into time lapses, want to know more, drop a comment in the video below. That'll help me prioritize what types of videos I work on, what I start sharing. Maybe it'll get me back out with the Timelapse View sooner than later. And conversely, if you're already doing time lapses, got some expertise, want to share some tips and tricks about how to really make compelling time lapses, share that as well. That's kind of the whole point I started doing videos, is that good ideas come from everywhere and we can share that knowledge. We can all get better together. You got any other questions about photography? The drill. Comments below. Want to keep it private? You contact me through my website, and I usually turn a response around in a day or two. And that's going to do it. Thanks very much. My name's Scott Davenport, and happy shooting.